So, this is another episode of Language Learners and Language Lecturers. Thought some alliteration would be cool for the title. You'd
It's very good.
appreciate that,
Very
right?
good.
Okay, so the last two people I had were professors of Spanish and German, although Ben is transitioning, as you know.
Right.
But what's fascinating about this is, as an English teacher, you deal with kids who really already speak English, but are need to improve in other areas, right? They're not trying to learn this is an apple or this is an orange. But
Right. They should have the basic vocabulary down, but the grammar, the finer points of organizing ideas and things like that. Yes, that's what they need to work on.
Yeah. So, well, last I saw you, you were teaching at my high school.
Right. Notre Dame High School. Yes, for
And
many years.
Well, how long were you teaching at Notre Dame?
I was there. I sat down and figured it out. I was there for 26 years.
26 years.
Yes.
I'm 26 years old. That's
There we go.
great. Wow. So, what made you transition from, and when did you transition over from Notre Dame to Baylor, if that's what happened?
Yes, just this past year was my first year teaching at the Baylor School, and
Okay.
and again, after being in one place for a long time, I thought it was time for a change, and I had been looking for a while, and I was lucky to find that situation, and I really enjoyed my time this first year there.
What was your experience like, to summarize it, if you can? I mean, it's probably difficult to summarize that in a few sentences, but I mean, you can take however you want it to describe your experience at Baylor thus far.
Well, it was a bit of a challenge when I taught you. I'm sure I had you as a senior, correct?
Junior.
As a junior, I didn't teach you senior year? No, okay. For years and years, I taught juniors and seniors, the really upper level, the AP students. We did the dual enrollment classes through Chattanooga State there. So I was basically teaching college English to high school students. And then when I transitioned to Baylor, I did have a senior class, but they also gave me some freshman classes to teach, which I had not done in a while. So that was a bit of a transition. And being a literature teacher, that's usually what you teach in high school. Getting used to teaching things I've never taught before or had not taught in a while. So I had a few adjustments to make. Yes.
Would you say the dynamic of the technology has also changed some? When I was in high school, for instance, I remember distinctly there being a bigger focus on pencils. When my brother went to school, he's 8 years younger than me.
Yes.
He had much more of a focus on the technological aspect, as I did when I was in school. I'm wondering how that might have influenced your teaching.
Well, yes, there's especially, I always say, before pandemic and after pandemic. Pandemic, I think, changed a whole lot of the way that people teach and the way we deliver materials to students. It was already starting to do that in my college classes that I was teaching, the freshman college English classes. Most of the textbooks were online. We were reading literature online. If you had poems or short stories, they would be there electronically. Occasionally there would be a small paperback for a novel or a play, but almost everything was online. And then, of course, once you realize that everyone has a laptop, right? Well, let's do all our writing assignments online too, and you can turn them in online. And I got pretty efficient grading essays through Microsoft. And it was a period of adjustment, but there's many tools on there where you can give students feedback and just zap it back to them, and they can quickly send it back to you. They don't have to worry about finding a printer or running out of ink. You can just send whatever writing assignment, from a paragraph to a 5-page essay to the teacher pretty quickly. But then, now that we're back in school full time and moved away from pandemic mode where we had to deliver a lot of materials and everything online through Zoom and things like that, the Chat GPT has reared its, I don't want to say ugly head, but it's reared its head. And I see, and talking to my colleagues, we are adjusting our teaching methods to, darn it, we're going to have students write more by hand in the classroom, so we know that the thoughts, the ideas, the organization is coming from them, and not from some AI bot out there where you just type in a few basic ideas and it will come up with a paragraph or even a full essay for you. That's the challenge. I mean, that's what English teachers do. We want to encourage students to write, to help them become better writers. And if they're relying on technology to do all that for them, what do you do? You've got to teach students how to write and create things on their own. Right.
So, and that's a great point. Since the release of ChatGPT and through its evolution up until now, has it gotten more difficult to recognize when students are using ChatGPT to write?
Yes. I mean, for a while there, they said, well, there are these, AI detectors. You can put writing assignments in to see if they've used AI. But I think that it's coming back that there have been, I guess the word is false positives about, whether or not students have used AI or not. But yeah, it's, you go back to the original point, AI is something that is there and that teachers are going to have to deal with, I think, from here on out. And again, maybe we go back to maybe not writing in pencil, but maybe pen and paper, and see that students have created something on their own using their own brains. I mean, that's the point of education. We're developing and expanding your brain, creating new pathways for you to figure out how to use language and to articulate your ideas yourself and not have someone else do it for you.
Well, we can try quills, but I don't think people like
Yeah.
that very much.
I always say as the joke, people, complain about, oh, the books are going away. It's all going to be on computer now. But you wonder back when we had the scroll 2,000 years ago, and then Gutenberg comes along, and oh no, Gutenberg's going to ruin the scroll. The scroll was the way we learned how to write and read, and now here comes this guy along with this new technology that's going to change everything, which it did. So I think there will be a place, always be a place now that we cannot go back from computers. There will probably be a place for AI in how we create things, or maybe even to brainstorm ideas to create things. But we as humans, I think the English class is about us learning how to use language ourselves and to express our ideas, right? So we have to train our brains to read, to write, to vocalize things, right? We can't have computers doing it for you. Then I guess we stop being human, right?
Yeah, I mean, and there's some thought experiments about, how far this can go with AI. I mean, like, movies have played with this, like Blade Runner, or I don't know if you've seen the old Blade Runner with Harrison Ford.
Oh, yes. One
AI
of the best.
Eventually transforms into some kind of humanoid, android-like hybrid or something that's, able to do everything humans can do, but better. And, so,
I mean, that's one of the big, the novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, right? And the movie starts as technology advances and it becomes really good at imitating humans. What is human and what is not human, right? And I think we want to maintain our uniqueness, distinctiveness as human beings, and not none of us want to be replaced by a computer, I don't think.
I don't think so. I don't think so, but I don't know. There's some people who have very strange obsessions, as the gentleman who worked with Elon Musk to help further AI, and Elon described him as somebody that was not humanist, like pro-human, like
right.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a couple of outliers out there that maybe don't share our interest in staying human over time.
Yeah, reminds me of the late great Frank Zappa, who created wonderful, complex music. And he talked about in an interview, I think I like working with humans. They're great, creative partners and collaborators, but I could save money. I just have this machine over here. I could push a button and it could play the guitar part for me better than any human being could. But he didn't want to do that. He wanted to, maybe that's the appeal of the creative side of things. We can say, look at that human being, look what they have created. And is that sort of an inspiration for the rest of us to be artistic and creative and to push ourselves to, limits we have not reached before because we see other humans doing remarkable things.
Somehow my microphone keeps gradually sinking while I'm talking. But I'll just maybe hold it.
We need a robot here to hold that
I
up
know,
for
right? Yeah. Make it all the way straight up like this. Oh, like that. Okay.
There we go.
Like this. Oh. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's
Okay.
very
similar problem.
very thoughtful of you.
Yeah. A good human solution to a technological problem. There we go. I think I was having the same problem. There we go.
There's
See?
that creativity at work.
I don't know how long would it take a computer to figure out how to do that. I don't know.
Well, it could observe someone doing it and then copy. And
Copy.
They're really, really great at that.
This apparently is going to be on the internet and
yeah.
And some sort of AI chatbot will latch onto it and tell us how to solve our audio problems, right?
You never know, And this is a little off topic, but since you now teach at Baylor.
Right.
Okay, this is post-pandemic when you started at Baylor, just barely, right?
Right. I mean, just last year, yes, just last August.
Barely. Mm-hmm. And so that mean you were at the end of the pandemic at Notre Dame.
That's correct.
Some of that time, were you teaching remotely?
Yes. Yeah. So we would have. I try to blot this out of my memory. That was one of the most difficult times teaching I've ever had. So at least a semester, we were definitely at home. Maybe that whole year. I think that whole year we were at home, and I would have to. We used Microsoft Teams as our online platform, and I would post assignments on there. And then at least once a day for about 45 minutes, I would meet with my classes and check in with them and give them some instructions and, tell them this is where you need to look. This is what you need to read. This is your next assignment. And again, send that assignment in to me, and, I would check it and grade it and send it back. And, so that was the process for about a year.
And why was it really challenging for you to do that? Well, was it the in-person element of being with the students? Because I would think, just from a cold Apollonian logical perspective, that there shouldn't be that much of a difference.
Right.
But it seems like maybe that in-person element plays like a strong role psychologically.
Oh, definitely. Right. You have, again, what... Can teachers one day be replaced by, video lessons on the computer? Is that coming? But, why do you have the student-teacher relationship, right? I can look at Anthony in the eye and say, Anthony, I need you to do well on this assignment. This last assignment, you did some good things. You could have done some things better, but you need to work on this, this, and this, right? I know you personally, and I know your strengths and weaknesses. And education in all its forms, I think, is it's about building relationships, right? You contacted me, almost 10 years later. You remember me, and you thought, oh, he might know someone who could talk about language. Oh, maybe I want to talk to him about language. He seemed to know something about that. And I think about, why I became a teacher, or especially the English teacher, and all my great English professors that I've really, back in college, really, admired for not just for their knowledge, but the way they interacted with students and inspired them to be, better students, better people.
That is fascinating, and actually, I hadn't planned to talk to you first, but I thought this is called Language Learners and Language Lectures. So I mean, all language, and
Right.
like, why rule anything out? I've even thought about having someone on for music, which, you know, I've always considered as a language as well. I mean, you know, you write it, you communicate it,
Yeah.
you know, you, if I can write something, a line, a piece of music for somebody, and whether they're from China or Russia or the U.S. or Venezuela, they can read it and play it. You know,
Right.
it's I would say it's a language,
And,
although it's
yeah, I mean, what does music convey? It's usually some sort of feeling, some sort of emotion. You can create mood with notes and how you play them. It can be interpreted different ways by different people, right? So yeah, I think that's true, right? Spoken, written language with an alphabet, with a syllabary. I mean, that's just a vehicle for us to convey our thoughts and feelings to other humans, right? I guess that's
Yeah.
what music does too, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like if everything is mathematics, and technically everything is, you know, language. The cool thing about language is that we use frequencies to communicate verbally, but the way that we're able to communicate is by not using most of the options that we have and using only specific options.
Right.
And that's the same thing you do in music. Like, you have 12 notes that you use, and depending on which octaves you're playing those notes, then they're going to be played at different frequencies in combination with how you want to tune them. So if you can tune them at like 432 hertz, or you can tune it to slightly more or slightly lower. But we're still selecting certain frequencies and discriminating against most of the others.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you do with English or Spanish. And you know what's cool about that is babies, for example. We know that babies are open to all frequencies and sounds. So if you expose a young child from the age of like 0 up to 4 to other languages, their brain becomes adapted to hearing the sounds that are specific to those languages. And this even goes for kids of specific languages. So Russian. A child who's a native speaker of Russian, so they heard it from a young age upward, they're able to recognize a broader set of frequencies than other people of other Indo-European languages, like English and German, because there's probably more sounds in Russian. I mean, I looked at the Cyrillic alphabet, and it seems like the sounds are slightly nuanced. They're not exactly the same. They're similar, more similar than the similarities that exist between English and Chinese, obviously,
Right.
or, you know, Swahili and French.
Yeah.
You know,
The clicks and whistles of the sub-Saharan, some of those languages
Yeah.
there, yes.
so it's really fascinating to see how we discriminate against things, and it turns out that discriminating against most things is how we operate, literally, in whether it's language or other aspects.
Yeah.
Discrimination is not always a negative thing. It can be
Right.
really
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like we're a bit biased to think like the word discrimination is bad,
Yeah.
but we do it all the time.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a really simple example. I've been thinking about this lately. Students in class, again, interacting with students in class. And you see a student in the back of the room doing this. And I go, do you have a question, or are you just stretching? Because I don't know. It seems like half the time they have, the classic, why are you raising your hand? Well, you must have a question. Oh, my shoulder hurts. I'm moving it back like that, right? That is, nonverbal communication, a form of language. And I, as a receptor of that language, have to interpret it somehow, right? It's probably one or two things. It could be something else. I don't know what the third option is, but, question or stretching?
Yeah, that was probably me back.
Yeah, you were
Probably
stretching
I
all the
was.
time, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's body language. I
yeah,
didn't like sitting for extensive periods of time.
yeah,
And when I was in middle school, I would often, they allowed me to do this. It was small school. We had
yeah.
300 to 400 kids total out of 8 grades and kindergarten. So, not a big school. And I would often get out of my seat, just stand up, stretch,
Yeah.
And they, they
Oh
had no
yeah,
problem. They got used to it. I mean,
yeah,
the first few times I did, like, what is he doing? But and later on, they just kind of got
yeah.
used to it. So I was definitely guilty of that. But and what are some of the difference that you've noticed between your time at Notre Dame and now being at Baylor?
Um, Not too much. I mean, people say, well, how are the students at Baylor different? I go, well, they're, you know, teenagers. They're adolescents. Adolescents act a certain way. Some are more driven. Some are, just trying to scrape by. Most of the time, you have to be, as a high school teacher, you have to be an encourager. And maybe that's the human element, right? You have to convince people that what they're doing in the class and for homework, that is worthwhile. And I don't think that, changes from school to school. The physical environment, again, is a little bit different. It's a bigger campus. It's spread out. And maybe that's a good thing. Students have many different buildings. It's like a college campus, right? They have many different buildings they have to walk to. And a lot of times, especially the upper school students, they will have a free period built in within that day. And again, I think, going back to some more traditional schools, what is it? The industrial model of education, right? It's almost like an assembly line. For 45 minutes, you're going to be in math, and then you got to move to science, and then you're going to move to English, and then you're going to move to Spanish. That, how effective is that? If we gave more freedom, more movement to students, which I kind of see that on the Baylor campus, maybe it creates a better learning environment to give students a little bit more freedom, like you said, especially middle school, right? You're sitting in a chair for like 7 hours straight. That seems, or almost 7 hours straight. That seems a bit extreme when you think about it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I think as we move forward, I think we have to start rethinking education, and obviously how it's going to be delivered will change, but what will be the expectations for students, right? Is it just, you're going to sit in different rooms or one room all day? I mean, if you're elementary school, right, you sit in one room all day for 7 hours. Like, thank goodness for recess, right?
Yeah. Toward the end of my time at Notre Dame, it seemed as if the school had been changing more and more rapidly. And no doubt much of that, however I feel about it, whether my feelings are somewhat objectively true in some fashion or not, COVID had a lot to do with it,
Yes.
And my brother describes a school that's much different than what I remember. No doubt that is in part because of our differing perspectives, right? We're just different
Right.
people, so we're not going to see the school the same way anyway. But, while he was there, he described the school being more polarized. There was a time where maybe it was close to the election or something like that, and he described like half of the students as being more like liberal and half of the students being more conservative. That kind of stuff did exist when I was there, but I don't know that it played any significant role. Like, I don't think any of us really thought about that.
Right.
But how would you describe, I guess, relating to my next question, how would you describe the atmosphere at Baylor?
Well, I don't think we can, sadly, wherever we go now, we cannot escape the political polarization. I think, again, because of technology, 24-hour news cycles, social media, people are steered by metrics and other things to their point of view is the right point of view. And if you do not have my point of view, you're obviously on the wrong side of history. You can say you're evil and corrupt. I think is people go that far, right? You're either on the good side, or you're on the bad side. There's no middle ground, right? If you even talk to those people on the other side, so I think, well, in both schools I've worked at, I don't try to bring up politics, and if it shows up in the classroom, I try to steer away from it. Especially in the English classroom, it's all about teaching critical thinking skills and studying history and human society through literature and seeing how other people in the past have dealt with, political polarization, right? You study the Crucible. You got to talk about McCarthyism, right? And we should have learned those lessons and applied them to our history today, but we seem to have forgotten them. So I think, especially the history teacher, the English teacher, that's our job to put the current situation in context and give students, I'm not trying to tell students how to think. I'm just saying this is how people dealt with situations in the past. And maybe we're not being so smart about dealing with this situation in the present.
One of the teachers, the Latin teacher, her name escapes me. But as I was talking to her, because Latin is interesting, interestingly, not a language that you speak generally.
Yeah.
You want to use it for other purposes, whether it's using it to read ancient texts or biblical texts, or I say biblical texts, but I mean more religious texts, or using it to study the etymology of other Romance languages. She was saying that the struggle for her was largely due to a deficiency in the necessary English vocabulary in order to translate the words. Mm-hmm. And she had to spend much of her time concentrating on that. And I said, and asking her, inquiring about that, she said, well, kids don't read as much today.
Right. True.
That's true.
That is
a wide.
True. There's so many distractions, but go ahead.
Yeah. So, is it difficult to get kids to concentrate on books, or how do you approach it? Do you feature audiobooks, or is it important for you that they do read?
No, definitely to read. The introduction of a text, beginning the text with students in class, reading out loud in class. I mean, that seems like an old-fashioned sort of thing to do, but to get them to speak the language, just to go around the room, and just say, you do this paragraph, you do this paragraph. Because again, on their own, I don't know, I sat down and thought about the percentages. Would 80-90% of students, would they read a book on their own if they were not asked to, or would not read a book? This is like 10-20% would go, I want to go home and I'm going to read a book because that is what I like to do. Has that gone away in people your age and younger, right? There's so many other things to do. I had one student, I think he went to Notre Dame before you. He was trying to explain to me one time that the video game was going to replace the novel as the new form of literature. I just sort of stared at him and shook my head, and I said, you have no idea what you're talking about. But yeah, my job, I figured this out several years ago. I think I finally did. That my job as an English teacher, as a high school English teacher, every day I should do two things. I should find a way to make students better writers, and I should find a way to make them better readers. Right? Those are the skills that they need to be good critical thinkers and participants in society, right? Can they use language effectively, especially written communication? And can they read and understand what is on the page before them? And when we do that, we've got to challenge students, right? We've got to find complicated texts with hard sentence structure and difficult vocabulary because, we're expanding their brains as they read and try to understand what is put in front of them, right? We can't have high school students and, you have an independent reading book you want to read. I want to go back and read Harry Potter. Well, you've read Harry Potter. That's very simple language, very simple sentences. Let's try something, I'm suggest all of you have to read William Faulkner on your own, but we do read that in class. But find a more challenging novel that will, expand your abilities as a reader, right?
Well, Harry Potter isn't that simple. I tried to read Harry Potter when I started over language in like German and realized quickly that I needed to resort to simpler material.
Okay,
than that.
there we go.
But
but again, you worked your way up to it, right? You expanded your reading ability so that you could.
I did.
Yeah.
So where I'm at now is I can read it in German, which is like wow, like that's a long. But the vocabulary that I speak at is not characteristic of the vernacular that's featured in Harry Potter. So I've got to work on that part. So the passive vocabulary is there.
Yeah.
At least enough to understand more than 90% of the words. But
are you looking up words as you're going through there, German? No, you're just sort of figured out in context and moving on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay.
I realized, I wanted to do that when I first started. I was looking up a lot of words, but I quickly realized that comprehensible input was way better, and that's what every effective person does is you just read what you can understand, and it's got to sit just out of the domain of comfort so that you can challenge yourself enough to just push yourself farther, but no challenges that are so significantly above what you can possibly achieve. If you can't figure it out, just move on to something you can understand.
Yeah, I mean, and going back to Latin and English speakers reading English and complex English novels and stories. I mean, that's one of the skills. I'm just thinking in my head now, I don't really need to concentrate on that this coming school year. Just figuring out words and context, right? What part of speech is it? Do I recognize any root words or prefixes or suffixes, right? Going back to, Latin tells us almost all of that, right? So yeah, that's what we're. Is that reading in high school? Is learning how to read texts that you wouldn't normally read, and to really expand your brain and to, come to an understanding and being able to interpret what you read. Right?
Yeah, it certainly comes in handy. You can't argue that. There's definitely situations where if you don't know how to interpret text, then you might glance over some really important nuances, whether it's people putting stuff in your product that you don't want, or glancing over important parts of contracts. Of course you can argue, well, somebody's going to do that for me, that's why I'm paying them. But maybe you want to still glance over yourself, so it never hurts.
Every time it seems like on the news or current events, someone makes a poorly informed choice in a political or social situation, my wife looks at me and she says, "The schools have failed us." Says, I'm trying my best to teach critical thinking skills and to analyze and put things into context. And again, that's not just the job of an English teacher, but technically we live in a democracy. To be a full participant in a democracy, you have to be an educated critical thinker, right? That's the purpose of school, right?
How do you feel, that brings me to, how do you feel about postmodernism and the controversies surrounding deconstructionism? That's a bit of a mouthful for some people, but it is a bit relevant today, isn't it?
What do you mean by where we can look at a situation and see where it breaks down
It's
within its elements, and it doesn't.
yeah, like this
Yeah.
sort of philosophy. Like I wonder. I sort of feel like maybe because it seems like deconstructionism is about, well, what the author writes is based primarily around how the reader is supposed to interpret it, whereas typically traditionally readers have tried to get into the author's mind of what they meant. That's what philosophy is about, right?
Right. Right.
But maybe everything sits somewhere in between. Like,
Yes.
there is definitely what the author is intended to, like composition. When we're playing, and Evan knows this, like when we were playing in band, we don't sit there and go like, well, I know it's written like this, but I'm going to play it how I want to play it. Like,
yes.
and it's
Yeah.
if we would have done that, we would have surely failed band. Like but,
Yeah, there's in graduate school there was I think it was just an article. I think it was a whole book. It was basically an article that said, "Is there a text in this class?" ? Right, and it's all about maybe not the term. The better term might be reader response theory instead of just straight up deconstructionism. Right, the author has a plan and puts words down on a page, create a certain effect. But I could give the book to 3 or 4 different people, and they would have a different interpretation of what those words on the page mean. And so, where do I, as a teacher, have a role in that? Well, when on student parent night or something like that, the parents always come up and go, "You're not one of those guys who say there's only one way to interpret a poem. I hated that guy back in college." I go, "No, whoa, hold up." What I try to teach students to do, you can say whatever you want about a text, but you have to find evidence to back up your assertion, right? You can say this poem means this. Well, what are the metaphors, the symbols that help create that tone or mood or theme, right? Can you prove that exists within the poem or within the novel, right? And certainly, people, the most famous text in the world, the Bible, people read the Bible all the time, and boy, do they have different interpretations of that, right? And everybody seems to be able to justify their interpretation by saying, well, X, Y, and Z is there, right?
Yeah, that's a great example, and it has occurred to me that I'm not sure that any of us are as efficient in recognizing the evidence of something as we probably think we are.
Yes. Yeah. Again, hey, that we are humans and not machines, right? We will bring our own bias and prejudice into a situation, right? And yeah, but I think as long as we approach a text with a clear and open mind, and look for the textual evidence, and not come with pre-drawn conclusions, right? That's how you make a strong argument. And again, that's especially upper level high school and into college. That's what we're teaching people to do, is to formulate arguments, right? Can you state a clear thesis, and can you prove said thesis, right?
Yeah. It's fascinating that you mentioned the Bible, because there's a stark difference between the fact that how the Bible is written or translated. Mm-hmm. The Quran is the same no matter how it's translated in every language. It's there's only one.
Yes.
But there's many versions of the Bible. It's
yes.
translated differently.
Yeah.
It's interpreted differently.
Yeah.
After translation, you can take the same Bible and
put a comma somewhere and completely change the course of Christian history. I was talking with my family about this the other day, about the Quran, right? To truly understand, according to Muslims, to truly understand the Quran, you have to know Arabic, right? And when you get a translation of a Quran in English, it will just say the meaning of the glorious Quran. It is not the Quran, right? It has to be, you have to understand it as it, I mean, I guess the angel Gabriel recited it in Arabic to Muhammad, and he recited it and someone wrote that down, right? So according to them, the Arabic is the true meaning of the Quran.
That explains why every Muslim I've met has studied some Arabic.
Right.
So,
Yes.
even I literally got my hair cut by a guy who was like a regular guy, and he starts talking about the Quran and that he's trying to learn Arabic. So
Yes.
that's like, and this is spreading like wildfire. Like a lot of people are. I have relatives that are studying the Quran. It's like big phenomenon. But it's fascinating that, that idea behind, understanding a text in the way it was supposed to be interpreted isn't equally spread or featured everywhere. So with the Bible, no one says, to my knowledge, well, if I want to study the Old Testament, what I really need to do is read the Torah in ancient Hebrew.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Or you better know your New Testament Greek, right?
Yeah.
To really understand what, Jesus was saying, right? Or what Paul was saying. So, yes. I don't know if you know this. My wife is a Presbyterian minister. And
I did not know that.
Yes. And so when she gets ready to deliver a sermon, she will look at the text, whether the Gospels or the letters of Paul or even the Old Testament. And then she will go difficult words that she runs across, right? Okay, well, what is that in the original Greek? And what did that mean? What is that in the original Hebrew? What did that mean in that context? And it's, very interesting stuff, with the things she comes up with. I wish I had an example on the top of my head. I do not, but you can bring her in next time and talk to her about it. But,
Why not?
no, not.
Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, ancient Hebrew was spoken at a time that English did not exist at all. I mean, there is no English.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
it's interesting to me. I wonder how they even went about translating. I think they translated it from ancient Hebrew to Latin and then English.
Yes. Yes, the Vulgate,
know.
right? St. Jerome in the Vulgate, right? Yeah, and then I know all this stuff from my wife. There's a strain of conservative Christianity in America that the only correct translation of the Bible is the King James version, written in the early 1600s, which most biblical scholars will say it has its faults and its political prejudices and everything else. Right. So maybe, I don't know, again, I'm talking maybe off topic for me, but I think the New Jerusalem Bible, which came out in the middle of the 20th century, that had all more modern, up-to-date linguistic scholars who tried to have a more exact translation of what the ancient Greek, the ancient Hebrew was saying.
There's also some of the books that were, because I think older Bibles, like there's an Ethiopian Bible that still has the book of Enoch in it. And so I don't know, we might just not know what the oldest Bible is. No one's found it yet.
Yeah. Well, again, going back to Islam, this is not about language now we're talking about religion, but going back to Islam, the Muslims would say, Muhammad, the seal of the prophets, he is the most correct of the prophets because he got the direct line from God through the angel Gabriel. He recited that to the people in Medina, and pretty soon after that, people started writing it down. Right? There was no lapse time of, we've heard this oral story for decades or centuries. Let's write it down now. It was direct from, from the angel. So take that for what you will.
Yeah. There is a bit of and back to language, I spend a lot of time on language apps. Like there's Tandem, which more or less is a language learning app. You can say what it is it's a platform for people to practice whatever language that they want to practice. Sometimes people use it for language learning,
Yes.
but you know how that goes. Um, and I've been able to talk to many, like hundreds of people from around the world from that one app. Um, I got kicked off because of
I do not judge.
stuff that
Yeah.
was not my fault, but
Yeah.
anyway, I'm not on it. But when I was on it, I remember, there being a bit of controversy around. I'll not say controversy, but it's more like, well, if you're in a different country and you're a native English speaker, like how much of an effort should you make to learn some or much of the language that's featured when most people who are trying to expose themselves to opportunities of a higher nature or more technical nature are trying to learn your language, right? And that is something that was always never, like, no one ever agreed on that answer.
Right. Yeah.
An engineer might say, well, I'm not going to learn anything. I mean, if I go to Germany, they're just going to speak English.
Right.
A doctor might say, well, yes, I should definitely learn, other languages when I'm in another country, because you never know if a patient is going to be able to.
What hurts? Yeah.
Right. So that's always fascinating, because it seems to me that we have an innate sort of advantage in that way in the States that, we just speak English and everyone happens to want to learn it. The thing I found is that it is my observation, and I don't know if it's true or not, but Americans don't feel like they can learn other languages that well, which is strange to me, because it's like, well, you're speaking English. I mean, you learn that, but there's something, I don't know, some kind of indoctrination where people just don't think that they can. And it's brilliant people to people who are just of average intelligence or less that all think that you have to have some sort of talent or skill to pick up something else,
Right. A different language.
Yeah.
That's important. Yeah. Yeah. And I think what works against us is the size of the United States, and the two oceans on either side. And boy, are we isolated a lot from the rest of the world. We don't have to have those. They don't have to have those interactions, right? Somebody's not going to hop on the train from Switzerland and end up in Spain several hours later, and have to figure out how to get lunch while they're in Madrid, right? So I think we have insulated ourselves, and for better or for worse. And so I think for the average American, they say, well, why do I need a foreign language? I can operate just fine and get everything I need and take care of all my business while just speaking English, right?
Now, to flip that from one side to the other, Dr. Horn moved to Florida, where he taught, and actually he was teaching at a high school in the city where my uncle lives.
Okay.
Until he moved from that city. That's Riverview. And a lot of kids down there don't speak English,
right,
like one bit. Now, I don't imagine you've had to deal with much of that, have you?
No, not really. By the time I get students in high school, even if say they live in a home where their parents do not speak English, right? Where they're they go home and they would speak Spanish all day. By the time they get to 9th, 10th, 11th grade, they have acclimated to the American culture, the American language. I have had quite a few foreign students. I think you remember your time at Notre Dame. We had quite a few Korean students.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of work with understanding Korean students and why they come to America and them adapting to American culture. Excuse me, things like that. And there were still some things that they would have to learn to, they come to America to go to American colleges, universities. They have that degree. They can go back to Korea and write whatever ticket they want because they can speak English and they have an American college degree. But, just the little things that they have not picked up on. They may have studied English in Korea before they come, but especially written expression. Again, I don't know how much you've studied Asian languages. I've studied a little bit. The use of articles is not is not very prevalent. I don't think they exist at all. So we have to teach East Asian students. You have to use an article here. Okay, the definite, the indefinite. It's a whole new world for them. So
Yeah, I don't think articles exist in Russian either.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, I have not began to study languages outside of the Indo-European framework, specifically Western. So I've stayed pretty close to home as much as I've experimented, and I have, I mostly stayed when, so my second language is German. Then it's kind of a battle whether or not my third language is Dutch or Spanish. What happened was I was motivated I had this idea that because I studied etymology, and that helped me a lot with learning other Germanic languages. So I don't have COVID.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so after I studied the etymology of English, bringing me back to Old English, which I'll get to later.
Yes.
It allowed me to learn German more easily. And then with a strong knowledge of German, I just kind of got to where I was really curious. And what happens is if you know German really well and you're a native English speaker, Dutch is much more easier to learn than other languages. And so I spent quite a bit of time with that. And I can speak fairly decent, like more than a basic level of Dutch, which is pretty cool just because it was, so I watch cartoons and stuff like that. Yeah, nothing impressive. I don't even know if I'll ever be able to use it in any meaningful way, but it's just fun to do.
Right.
And what happened was with Spanish, that's just useful. So I have kind of like two lists, like languages that are useful for me, languages that I want to learn. And German kind of meets both. Like, you can use it if you're going overseas for travel on one day, or even people here I've met. I actually ran into a guy in this city from Austria that happened to be doing physical therapy where I was. And I just recognized he had an accent, and I was like, "Hey, where are you from?" I'm from Austria. Oh, Vicky.
Yeah.
So that's how that happened. And with English, it's really interesting because English is not nearly as conservative as German, and learning about English, it's almost like, well, are we speaking English really? Because Old English wasn't, Old English was technically a dialect of German when it was Old English.
Yes.
Like then before pre-Viking influence, and I mean, if you go back and you compare the ancient texts of Old English, if it was written, because it probably wasn't, but if somebody wrote something in Old English, it's just kind of like what they heard, and okay, I'm guessing it's going to be like this, so this is what I'm going to write, and you can see that it's virtually the same language as Old High German, with some nuances, kind of like the difference between, I don't want to say like Norwegian and Danish, but something like that. If you have ever seen Norwegian text and Danish text, they sound a lot different, but when you read them, it's almost like reading the same thing. And after the Viking influence, and then after Anglo-Norman French, this is not the same language at all.
Right.
Whereas just 1,000 years ago, German today is almost the same language. There's some words that are no longer used, or that have changed enough that you can see the difference, a lot. But for the most part, it's really hasn't changed that much. And I realized, I found out most languages do change, but not nearly as significantly as English has changed in 1,000 years.
Yes.
That is wild. You know?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I've always wondered about that. It's interesting you bring that up. If, I used to study and teach Beowulf quite a bit. It's the Anglo-Saxon dialect of German once they settled in England, right? That's what they spoke and eventually wrote. But it does come from the High Old German, so it's basically very, very similar. Like, would it be like Shakespeare in English and modern English, sort of a similar?
There's a word in Beowulf called Wognum, which is like plural of woke, which is literally the same word as the German Volk, is the V sound versus the W sound, which is also interesting. Literally, I was wondering about the V and the W sound and like where it's derived. For some reason, like because I thought, hey, these are two separate sounds, but they might be derived from the same sound, but some people interpret it, because in Dutch you say the V sound, but in Flemish, in Belgium, they speak this literally the same language, but the W sound is present instead of the V. So, like, what is dat versus what is dat? They literally. So I don't know how that turned out.
Yeah.
But,
Again, I need to do more digging and research. I was always fascinated by the letter W, which is W, but really it's a double V. It's a double V. Yeah.
That's why, and literally, as you're reciting the German alphabet, by the time you get to W, it's Dupove.
Yeah. We need to bring Ben back in here to explain all this to us. I think he probably knows. I'll have this question in my head when I see him this fall. So.
I think we get a lot of stuff wrong.
Yes.
We just, but we just rolled with it. And so we just.
And then, I always like students when we're studying, if we go back to Beowulf or we go back to Chaucer and showing how the language has changed over the years. Like I have to point out, especially 1066, the Norman invasion. As you said, Norman French was maybe the biggest change in the English language. And why we have certain vocabulary words, what we kept from the German and what we took from the French. I don't remember if Ben talked about this or not in his interview. I don't think he did, but the big difference I always like to point out is the Saxon peasants were the peasants. They worked in the fields, right? And the French lords, they sat in the castle and they ate the meat that the peasants were raising. So the words for the animals we have today are from the old German, but the words for the cooked meat, that's the French, right? We have swine, we have pork, we have, cow, and we have beef, right? Things like that, right? Lamb and mutton.
Yeah. I actually had a long conversation with a friend of mine. One of my best friends is from Germany, near Frankfurt, and he was telling me, like, what I love about German is that you can literally build words,
right?
And like Legos and
ridiculously long words.
Yes. And he said, I just feel like you really can't do that in English as much. And I said, well, it's just we don't always use traditionally English words, like, because he would say, like, I just feel like he would like tell me a Latin word, and like it's like, well, that's not really an English word. That's a word that we adopted into English, and that's what we use. Yeah. But it's not actually the Germanic word, And I was telling him about this movement called English.
Yes.
Where it's an effort to speak and write English without using any of the Latin or French words. Yeah. And it's difficult to do because what happens is there aren't enough words to construct complex paragraphs or works in English without using the Latin or French words. You can speak English with no Latin or French words at all. That's why it's Germanic languages. Yes. But there's not enough to make do anything really, really fancy. So what ends up happening in English is that they steal words from neighboring Germanic languages and build like this you'll find this fascinating, and I thought this was funny. Like a guy made a video about this, and he was talking about how they would be creative. So you take a word like umbrella, which is not Germanic. We just use the word umbrella. We don't have a Germanic word for it technically.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to say or use a word for that was Germanic, you'd have to build one. So he was saying you can steal the word Regenschatten from German, which is basically rain shade, and put it together, and you get an umbrella.
Yeah. And then you say rain shade, and people would probably know what the heck you're talking about, right?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. So, you take, it works with cognate words, because Regen, rain, Schatten, literally, they're both cognates of, although they're not necessarily easily recognizable, they're cognate words. And you just use that, build it, and now you have an umbrella. Same goes for a television. You say in German, Fernseher, like far see, far seer.
Yeah.
So you can do that to a high degree, but it would still be quite difficult, So we've become very, very much reliant on these external or extraneous words.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So it's German roots. French came in. Still stick with some of the Latin. I always like the British colonies in India. We have all sorts of interesting words from Hindi, things like that. Yeah, we just collect things as we go, right?
Yeah. I think Americans are warned that in Singapore, you don't really, if you're not used to the Singaporean English, you won't understand the loan words from Mandarin and
oh, really? Okay.
Other languages that are native to the area, because they have a lot of loan words from Mandarin and I think languages from India, Hindi, and so, there's how many languages spoken in India? Quite a bit, so that's always fascinating. So what's your plan now for as far as the future? Are you going to stay on course and teach the same way you've always been teaching, or kind of adopt as you go now that we have ChatGPT?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't really just stay the same now that we have.
No. Yeah. You can't. Yeah. Students evolve. Technology evolves. I change. Constant state of flux, right? If we get philosophical about it. Yeah. Again, it's this balance, right? Technology is great. Technology is a good tool. But when does that start taking away from what students need to learn and be able to do? A big shift coming. I haven't, my new assignment at Baylor, I'm not an AP teacher. I used to be AP language and literature back at Notre Dame for years and years and years. Really enjoyed teaching that. But I had to, even when we were switching over to working on the laptop or the computer, when students had to write for their 3 essays for the AP exams, they had to write them by hand in a book, in the old test book with the lined pages. It's like, oh, I guess we need to practice that because people don't do that. And you have the kids shaking their hands like this. Oh, my hand hurts. You need to build up your writing muscle. You're not used to writing out, 3 or 4 pages by hand anymore. So I felt that was my duty, my job to make sure they could write legibly by hand to get them ready for the exam. But I believe it's this year. I have to double check. I'm almost positive. At the end of this coming school year, 2025, all of the AP exams will be going electronic, where you answer your multiple choice questions online and you type up your 3 essays online, which I think most modern students, current students, will probably like that better. But what do we as teachers do about that, right? I was talking to the AP teacher, one of the AP teachers at Baylor, and, this past few years, he says, I've just been having them writing everything in hand in class because I don't want to deal with that ChatGPT nonsense, right, as she put it. And that worked well for her because she's getting them ready to write by hand for the exam. But now that's going away. right?
Yeah.
Do we still get students to write on paper at all? Or should it all be on the computer because that's the way of the world? And again, you might be able to speak to this. I always talk to my students about the writing process, right? You just cannot sit down. I have a 5-page essay due tomorrow. I'm going to sit down at 11 o'clock tonight. And not that you ever did that in any point at any school, right? I'm just going to sit down and write this whole thing down. I'll be done by midnight. That's not how that works, right? You got to think, you got to plan, you got to outline. And I would tell them, well, back in the good old days, when I was in college, I mean, I did have a computer to type essays on and to print them out. But because of my educational background, I would always write everything out by hand, beforehand. I would have the whole essay written out with scratch outs and everything else. And then as I was typing the handwritten thing into the computer, I'm editing as I go. That was one of my editing steps, is to take the handwritten.
You had a computer back then, not a typewriter?
Yeah, late 80s, early 90s. I had an Apple IIc and a printer. It had those little, I don't remember what those are called, the little papers with the perforations, the holes on the side that fed it through the spool, through the printer. Yeah. And I think, by the time, early 90s, I think it was pretty much accepted that you would type something up on the computer and print it out and turn it in that way. That was but of course we would still have written exams at the end of the semester, and they give us the little blue book, and we'd have to write out our thoughts and about whatever work of literature in the blue book, and the professors would grade all that stuff by hand. But essays during the semester would be printed out.
Now, I can corroborate that. In this, to my surprise, I wouldn't have not have guessed this during the years I was in grade school, but I use computers by far way more than I use a pencil. Like, if I'm using a pencil, it's for notating something, if in the moment, like scratching it down, and I use computer for everything else.
Yes.
I mean, most days I don't even use a pencil.
Yes.
I think I used a pencil to write something on paper maybe yesterday or 2 days ago. But beyond that, I mean, literally, it's like increments of months where I don't use pencils.
Yes.
It's insane.
Yeah.
So I don't think that anybody predicted that was what was going to happen when we were, in the years where pencils were, so important. But literally, I mean, the pencil is going away like the quill.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I hope the Ticonderoga people saved their money, right? Did they have that invested in something else? Or have they diversified, right? Because they're...
it's gonna be one of those things where kids in the futures are gonna be joking about how we used to use wooden objects to scribble stuff on trees.
What is that stuff? You put lead in them? What is that stuff? I'm curious too. Just ask you a question. Like, when you read a novel, you read a work of nonfiction, philosophy book, right? Do you annotate as you read? Do you underline? Do you put notes in the margins? Do you?
I highlight stuff on an e-text.
On an e-text, okay.
I use electronic text for all all the reading I've done on e-text.
Okay.
The reason why I've done that is because personally I developed this condition post high school where it's called Stargardt's, and it means that I have no central vision, so I'm essentially blind.
Oh no.
But I have my peripheral vision is intact, and it basically, what it means is that I don't have a hole in the center of my vision. My peripheral vision provides for the illusion that the picture is still the same as it was. The difference is that when I look at something directly, I don't see it because I don't have any central vision. So if I take a pen, one of those pens that has the lights on the end of it, you can click. So if I take that and I move it from side to side, and if I'm looking directly ahead and it passes right in front of me right here, I won't actually see it. It'll disappear, and then it'll come back into the frame once I move it to the left or right. So what that has done is it's affected my ability to read drastically.
I can imagine. Yes.
So I've had to be creative about that.
Yeah.
So it turns out, it's not as significant as I thought it would be. So it's a lot different than a traditional blind person who's probably struggles with, a lot of basic tasks. I don't struggle with that because most basic tasks don't require that I have to look at something directly.
Okay.
Which means essentially that I never actually look at anything directly. Like I always look slightly up, down, left or right, which is why my eyes look like the way that they do. Like a lot of people will tell me, "Hey, you look kind of like you're high."
I'm just sort of,
so that's why. That
But
happens.
you can on a screen, iPad or something, you can see the text
Yeah,
better.
so
Okay.
and I tend to like large screens more.
I can see that. Yeah.
My laptop, for instance, is about 17.5 inches long.
Okay.
So it's a big screen.
Yeah.
laptop.
You have to get the extra big bag to carry around. Yes.
Yeah. I like using tablets. I like going to the movie theater
Okay.
for obvious reasons, So, luckily in today's world in 2024, it's much easier
Yes.
to deal with, right?
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, 50 years ago, you might have been in some trouble.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
Today it's a lot better. One thing that changed that I'm working on is that because I still don't have all the technology that I'd like to have, is that growing up, I used to like to. Oddly enough, my favorite video game was Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door for a Nintendo GameCube, which requires a lot of reading.
Okay.
So if every game was like Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door, I could see the point that your former student made.
the video games replacing the novel.
Yeah. But most games are not like that one.
Right.
That just you just have to, it's from start to finish. It's a lot of reading, and they're not reading it out to you. You have to read it aloud. I can't play that game anymore. Like it's just not possible. So I need there's some goggles that I could use to zoom in on everything and make most tasks equatable to the average person, so as to essentially eliminate the significance of the fact that I have my condition. But that object, these e-goggles, they cost thousands of dollars.
Okay.
So that's something I'm working on.
Yeah.
I would like to get to where I could return to enjoying that video game.
So audiobooks. I'm sorry, change the subject. Audiobooks. Do you do that a lot or?
Yeah,
Podcasts, obviously, right? Yes.
Podcasts, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. I guess, and just because of my age and what I'm used to, I have not really transitioned to at least reading novels and things like that on the computer or the tablet. Poems, short stories, I put those online all the time for students to read, but I like to have a hard copy of a book. I'm used to the reading, the underlining, the annotating that way. Again, it's my teaching career continues. Will I change? I don't think print books are quite going away yet. Probably in my lifetime they'll still be around. But you wonder, again, 50 years from now, will the print book be what it is today? Well,
Yeah.
the newspaper is gone, right? We don't have really any printed newspaper, at least not here in town. But there are other places that have the printed newspaper. But most everyone just reads it online, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably. I think, in all honesty, books aren't going away. There's always going to be, even in the future, where people read most things online or electronically. There's always going to be people who are fascinated with books as much as people are fascinated with scrolls. We still have those.
Oh yeah, exactly. You go to the temple on Saturday and they'll open up the Torah and use your stylus and go over the scroll, right? So,
Yeah,
it's still there. Yeah.
No, but I mean, most people aren't like me, so there
Yes.
isn't the need for. I do miss the smell of books.
Yes.
You
You
know.
should go to McKay's one time, just walk around and smell, right?
So, but yeah, I mean, besides the that Ben mentioned that in one thing that he thought was really interesting about Baylor was that a lot of the alumni had been there their whole lives. That they
Yes. Yes.
had. So when you got there,
Hmm.
what were they like? What was it? You spent more time did you hit it off more with people who were like you, newer and not,
Yeah.
or did you spend a lot of time talking to those alums who've been there for that long?
Yeah. Well, mostly we had a small cohort of people who were hired to teach in the English department last year, and I think 3 or 4 of us were teaching freshman English. So we would get together and meet all the time and talk about what we what our plans are. We try to keep coordinated with what we were teaching and how we were teaching and everything else. So I admit I had a lot to do, a lot to keep up with, a lot to learn. So it was a pretty insular first year there. I stayed in my building, talked to my English department people for the most part, collaborated with them, and of course I would run across people who had gone to school there, gone away to college, and decided, oh, I like this place so much, I'm going to come back and teach. So yeah, and they love that school. They're very loyal to the school. I mean, just being out in the public today and going and seeing the doctor or somebody else. Oh yeah, where are you now? I'm at Baylor. Oh, I went there. That place is, they would just sing its praises. What a great and special place it is, and it is. It's a unique school. I wish. I mean, in the ideal world, I told a colleague of mine, in an ideal world, every school would be like the Baylor School, right? Small class sizes, plenty of help and support for the students, endless after-school activities so students can explore their interests, and just the idea that we can push our students and get them to be better students and better people. Right. But, of course, Notre Dame was very much like that as well. There were quite a few people that I worked with who had gone to school there and had came back and were teaching there as well. So,
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Did you ever get lost on that campus? I mean, it was pretty big.
it's pretty big. Not really. I knew where I go. One time said, we need you to come and meet somebody. The parents of a boarding student wanted to talk to me. Who would you come to the housing office and meet with them? I go, I have no idea where the housing office is. You'll have to. So they met me in the quad and led me over there. But yeah, it's just getting used to it. But again, teaching is a pretty intense profession. Some people say it's a very lonely profession, and it is. You're trapped in a room with young people all day, and when you're done with them, you have to sit down and either or both prepare the lessons for the next day and grade what the students had done the day before, and that doesn't lend itself to interacting with other humans sometimes. And people say, I would say, I work at Baylor. Oh, do you know such and so? And I go, I tell you what I do. I show up every morning and go to my classroom and work there all day. I go to the cafeteria building and eat lunch, and I come back and I work some more, and then I go home. Right? So it's that was a bit of an adjustment, that big campus and not meeting everyone that I technically work with. Right?
Do you know how many students are at Baylor? I think when I was at Notre Dame, there's about just over 300 students or something.
Notre Dame's usually around 400. I think at Baylor upper school, and again, don't quote me on this, upper school 9 through 12 is about 800 students, and then they have the middle school, which I think is probably about 400 more, so maybe about 1,200 students total there. So, and then a whole bunch of faculty, a whole bunch.
1,200 students. That's probably not that much if it's K through 12, is it?
Well, it's 6 through 12.
6 through 12.
Yeah.
That's
So, I mean, there's some, I don't know, regular public high schools around here, some of the bigger ones, say Bradley County or Soddy Daisy, 2,000 students or more. So, just 9 through 12.
So that's 7 grades total that are at Baylor, 6 through 12.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all I got for you.
Oh, okay. Well, it's good talking to you. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Yeah.